Hello. Well, today I'm joined by Mark Goodwin, recovering deputy head teacher, and I'll let him explain that title himself in a little while. But currently works with young people at risk of exclusion and with schools who are trying to improve their exclusion numbers. So I'm very excited because you'll know that exclusion is something that's very close to my heart and something I feel very passionate about, and it's such a big issue currently, and I'm certainly getting lots of phone calls from virtual schools asking me to support them in bringing down exclusion numbers. So Mark, presumably that's one of the things that you do, but maybe you'd like to introduce yourself and just kind of what's with the recovering deputy head? Where's that come from?
I think that as a deputy in secondary, in large secondaries, the nature of that job means that you become a little institutionalised in some respects. The focus is on results. The focus is on school improvement. The focus is on the big O and the demands of Ofsted. And you do as much as you can to individualise and connect on an individual level with students. But the nature of the job in a large comprehensive puts a big distance between you and the children, between you and teaching. And I accepted that as one of the costs of becoming a school leader and moving up the ladder. I was working towards headship, but circumstances happened at the school I was at, which forced me to really consider what I wanted to do. And what I'd always been passionate about was engaging students in learning, helping students, even the most disaffected students, to connect with school and learning and hopefully a subject that they can get passionate about. And I teamed up with a colleague and we set up reflective school support to work with permanently excluded students. Alongside that, I put all my training, teaching and learning behaviour specialism into my own company, which is a training company. And those two elements of my work now run alongside. Recovering deputy, I think what I've appreciated in the last year is what I was really most passionate about, and the opportunity every day to teach again, to engage with, to build relationships with some of our most disconnected students. Has been a revelation, really, and what I was always passionate about 20 years ago when I started teaching. So I don't mean to be flippant about school leadership and the demands of school leadership, but I have learned much more in the past year about all of the elements of the teaching job than I had done in the previous 19 years. And I'm no slouch with my learning, but the work I've been doing recently has given me incredible satisfaction, but I've learned an awful lot myself.
How fascinating though, and I think it's really interesting to hear that. And one of the great things about going to lots of different schools, working with lots of different people, is that you develop much more of an overview of different ways of doing things and ways that people respond in different circumstances. It does build, nourish and grow that database of humans. But I'm really interested in this disconnect, not least because I have had many a private conversation where I've been concerned that actually some of what I'm passionate about and what I'm trying to get schools to do in secondary schools, I'm not certain that secondary schools, the way they're set up, are equipped often to be attachment aware, trauma sensitive environments that support and nurture children and young people. And I realise that's probably a really controversial thing to say, but I just find that when I go into some secondary schools and I see even things like the way the building's structured, the way lessons are structured, the way departments are structured, the entry into that role even, which is very subject driven, I'm curious as to how that works. How schools can really, secondary schools can really not have that disconnect. I've seen some very positive things with restorative approaches. That seems to work quite well in secondary schools, if the will is really there. But I mean, what are your feelings about that? Am I being really too pessimistic and a bit drastic saying that?
I think you've been very realistic, very honest about what you must see on your with your experience around schools, and what I experienced in the schools I was in, but what I see now. I see schools operating in a system that that operates against, I believe, against those building relationships, against those connections. We have become very results driven. That has developed a high stakes culture that puts results above the human being, above the child. Now, there's a strong argument to say that those results are for the benefit of the student, but too often we can lose sight of the human being in our quest for the result. I think schools have become, some schools have become places where being a teenager, I'm trying not to be controversial myself, I suppose, but being a teenager and making mistakes and getting things wrong, finding things difficult for whatever reason, is not, young people aren't given the space to experience that and to learn from it. One mistake can be catastrophic. One mistake, one poor relationship with a teacher can result in exclusion, permanent exclusion even. In my work that I've done in the last year, I really try to withhold judgment about schools. Schools do what schools do. And I've been on the other side of the table on exclusion as a deputy. I've been in those meetings. I've been in those very difficult meetings around exclusion and even permanent exclusion. I really retain judgment on the schools that have permanently excluded the students we work with. However, you do wonder at the approaches, the behaviour approaches, the understanding some schools have of the needs of young people, because permanent exclusion, some of the permanent exclusions I've seen have led me to question how that student has been worked with, what's been said to that student, how they've been worked with when they find things difficult in the situations they're in. And I'll withhold judgment because I want to move forward. And what I'm trying to do is help the parent and the student to move forward from it. And in some ways, there has to be a disconnect with the process that they've experienced. But I do raise a very large eyebrow about some of the approaches schools have.
And we're in a very, very interesting time where there's a kind of polarisation, and let's face it, that is what is happening in the world right now. We are in this very polarised world, but and like the rest of the country on various issues, the education system is no different. And on this spectrum, we have this zero tolerance punitive approach on one end, and then a much more restorative relationship based approach on the other, and then a whole range in between. And I guess it's always interesting, really. I mean, it's sad for me to hear you say that you've observed students being excluded, and you wonder how on earth that came about. Because if we challenge that zero tolerance approach, or we talk about exclusion and behaviours that schools find challenging, we can often be greeted with, I'm talking about Twitter conversations, we can often be greeted with the notion that schools don't exclude easily, which I would hold that. I don't think schools exclude easily from what I've seen. And that somehow having any kind of nuanced discussion about it means that we are being critical and saying that schools are just willy-nilly excluding, but actually there's a great big space in the middle where we should be having a much more open and honest conversation about some of the things that you're talking about and that we both see in our work.
I think we've lost the idea that there might be a grey area, a middle ground. You mentioned nuance, but so much of behaviour management is about is just simply it depends, and to say that there is a binary response to behaviour is just really limiting to all professionals who work with other human beings, to say that there's only one way to deal with a behaviour. When I talk about behaviour, I talk about grey areas and I talk about depends. And you're right, Lisa, that there's that can generate a barrage of criticism just for even suggesting that there might be this more thought out approach. I try and cover that with the notion of responsibility. When I speak to the young people, I talk about three things, and I talk about potential, which I think is really important. Whatever's happened, we've got to rebuild and give a second chance. So I talk about potential, which is the future and hope. And I've got a few things that I do to build that. Talk about relationships, obviously. These are young people whose relationships have been absolutely shattered. They see school entirely negatively. But I also do talk about responsibility, and that the student has to do certain things. A school is a school is a school, and how they respond and how they speak, how they can conduct themselves, how they show up, it's all in their hands. And I bring in that element in the hope that that demonstrates that there is a balance that can be had between. So when people say, I'm all about relationships, or I'm all about something restorative, or something at the progressive end, I do say, well, it's not binary. There's something in between, and there's something almost outside that spectrum. And outside that spectrum lies, I always thought as a teacher that teachers knew that you think about the needs of the child, you build a relationship, you bend and you flex as the grown-up, you manage yourself in a way that would get a reaction, and not this one size fits all, you do as you're told, high control, which I just find bizarre that that's become anybody's currency, if I'm quite honest.
Yeah, and it does sometimes open up the questions really about, do you like children? Do you actually enjoy being around the energy of children and young people? Because it is a very particular energy. I love it.
Sure. I as a newbie to all of this, I've kept out of those zero tolerance arguments, and I really admire people that have engaged with it and challenged those suggestions. But my view is that I looked at the teachers at the start of my career who I wanted to learn from and be like, and the teachers I didn't want to be like were the extreme disciplinarians, the ones who spoke of breaking children, who punished, who I thought punished unnecessarily and disproportionately. And I looked at those teachers, and it reminded me of when I was at school, and those were the teachers that I failed to connect with. Those are the teachers I wanted to take on. Those are the teachers that I felt that it was my job to challenge. And all through my career, I've wanted to be the teacher that won with kids, that connected with kids and got the best out of them, not controlled them or disciplined them. And so the work I do now, I mean, what is easy for me to say is that the work I do now, if I went in with a zero tolerance attitude, I would get nowhere, because that is what has broken these kids in some cases. So I have to do something else. And I think I look at the professionals, and I look across the sector, alternative provision, special provision, and people do this because it's what works. It's what nurtures the child. It what help every child to matter. It what grows the child. But certainly my work, if I went in with you will do as you're told, this is what we're doing today, there is no question, I've got no chance.
And what's interesting is you've been teaching, you've been in education for over 20 years, and what I'm hearing you say is that there's nothing new about this kind of zero tolerance approach, but it does seem to have a different language now, because that has come from somewhere. All of a sudden we speak about isolation, we speak about, exclusion units, we speak about zero tolerance. This is a language that I wasn't familiar with. Now, that, as you're quite rightly saying, that doesn't mean it hasn't always been present, but I'm wondering what's driving that narrative and that language. Is it because schools are just so under pressure themselves? Is it because of the routine education?
Isn't it? Yeah, it's quick fixes, and you can quickly turn around a school if you go in hard line, if you go in my way or the highway, if you go in this is the way it's going to be. I've seen that done, and of course you'll have an impact because you will move on the more difficult students, either formally or informally. I think there is you're right, there is a language around this that has become currency around behaviour, it's they're a very wise head teacher that I still keep in touch with, taught me a few things. But one of the main things he said is that if you walk around with a hammer, you'll find yourself plenty of nails. And that idea that, if you're always looking for challenge and confrontation, you can find it all the time. But that's not the way to deal with young people. There's a different way to deal with young people to get the best out of them. And it doesn't involve a hammer. It's that hearts and minds, that's where you connect, that's where you win, and that's where you get the best out of students. I mean, to be completely controversial, Lisa, there's a government-approved approach to behaviour.
Yes.
And there's some very clever language. One of the most dispiriting is that, which has become common currency, is that some young people are removed because they are affecting the learning of the majority.
Yeah.
And this idea that they have to be removed so that the others can learn. I mean, whatever happened to, community, inclusive, we all get through this together, mixed ability, the skill of the teacher to bring the best out of the class, and manage even students that don't get it and find it difficult. That's not to say that students sometimes need time out or need time out of the classroom and need to work with somebody individually, but the amount of times more recently I've heard that kid needs to be out, get them out of my classroom, which I didn't hear that so much in the past.
And it's a very compelling argument, isn't it? It's very compelling that this child is taking away from other children who want to learn. They are fit to learn. They are ready to learn. Unlike this child who is ruining the whole educational experience for everyone else. It's very compelling for parents, who are, very, very rightly passionate about their children's education. Why should their education be disrupted and interrupted? Because the whole language is not, as you say, community-based, restorative, relationship-focused. Okay, what's happening here? How are we struggling with this? Because the curriculum, it strikes me, is just so jam-packed with everything else that there's no opportunities left for those kind of skills that are actually skills that support how we work together, how we are neighbours together, how we commune together, how we organise our communities together. Surely a school is a place where that's something that's learned. I mean, in a community, if you have, you don't just remove people that you struggle with. I mean, yes, if people do certain things that have a criminal nature, then we have the criminal system, there's the mental health system. Both of those systems will remove people. But generally, communities are about, like you say, how we kind of learn to be with people that we might struggle to be with, you know.
And how much you know, we've all learned as adults how much is to be had. You know, the positive effects on us, how we've benefited from that communal experience. And I think about clubs I've been part of. I've played sport all my life. I think of the friendships that I've still got. I think of the workplaces I've worked in over my lifetime, and those bonds and those friendships that come from communal interhuman interactions. And it's ups and downs, and it's rough with smooth, but you learn how to challenge, and you learn how to love and challenge and work with people, and work things out, and get on. And I think we're losing a bit of that, where it's seen that you can just, it's about me, it's about the individual, it's about what I need. And nothing should impact on that. I mean, schools reflect society, I think, and we see a more atomized society. See people, you know, more isolated. People are pushed outside. There's others. There's them, and that's reflected in school. I think sometimes we don't want those sort of kids. We don't want that sort of behaviour.
That begs to me a kind of sociological question, really, which is: do schools reflect society, or can society reflect schools? You know, can schools have a part to play actually?
Absolutely, yeah.
In making?
I think the best schools now, Lisa, they're countercultural. I think you see schools that make a stand about inclusivity, about diversity, about restorative, about relationships. And they are actually, you know, countercultural. I think that, and all power to them, all power to the heads and the teachers that make a stand for all of those values that are so important, but increasingly are being lost in wider society, where people are more confrontational, are more individualistic. These are, yeah, I mean, countercultural is something that I've really thought about the last few months, that you find yourself saying, but I don't see it like that. And you see what the best schools do, you see what the best practitioners do, you see what the experts do, and they're speaking against what is happening more widely.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like that all the time. I feel like when I go out training, which I'm sure is what you feel, is that I know that I'm speaking at the opposite end of the spectrum of what schools are being guided to do. And it takes that really passionate leadership team to know in their heart the right way forward to get the best out of the students. But tell me a bit about your work and where that takes you, and some of the specifics, because I think you do one-to-one stuff, don't you? And you do training, a bit of both.
Yeah. So over the year, my day-to-day work is one-to-one with permanently excluded students. Turnaround where it's possible. My partner and colleague is very well informed, well versed. Her background is in school inclusion at a local authority level. So there is help for parents in that respect about what are the next steps and getting the student back into school. My job is to teach them. They get their 10 hours statutory education, but part of that work is rebuilding the second chance, as I said at the start, is using a coaching methodology, solutions-focused coaching, to help them to make sense and reconnect with school in the broadest sense. So day to day, I can be teaching maths, I can be teaching English. I'm a history specialist, so I try and include a bit of Vikings or First World War, depending. But I've worked with students as young as 6 and students up to year 11 and prepping them for their exams. We've been successful in getting all but 2 of our students back into school, back into a new school, a school that's prepared to take on a PX students. And I'm sure you know the difficulty with convincing schools, but there are still very generous schools that will give second chances with a bit of persuasion, local authority work. The other side of my work has been training. I've delivered training across the country, mainly in Staffordshire, but I have been as far north as Yorkshire. And I've trained on behaviour, on an approach to behaviour that reflects my experience, but my view of what works in behaviour. And what I've tried to do is to combine the 2 elements by getting into schools and working with the disaffected boys, principally, the disaffected students on the verge of exclusion, maybe even permanent exclusion, and running a program, meeting with the students in order to prevent that from happening. I've done that in 2 schools, and the schools held on to those students. So that's almost getting upstream of the exclusion problem and putting something in place, working with students and staff to say, try this. And it works both ways. With the staff, try this approach, speak to them in this way, explain the work in this way, get them to do this, and working with students, as I said, about potential, about relationships, but also about responsibility as well.
Yeah, I like that, because the attachment aware model is quite clear that having high expectations, although yesterday in the training I was doing, we decided we preferred high aspirations. It felt more generous and more giving than expectations, but is a key part. Why shouldn't we have high expectations for our children rather than the limited labels that so many of them have to wander out of the education system with? But you reminded me that I used to work with students at risk of exclusion in the early noughties. So it's been quite a long time since I did that. And oh my goodness, I wish I'd known then what I know now. How many times do we say that in a day?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the good thing for me is that I'm learning those things now. What I wish I'd known then, I'm learning now, and I was always able to connect with disengaged students, but learning more about the particularities of ADHD, of autism. I mean, this fantastic work that's been done on attachment, I just find utterly fascinating. Stuff that I kind of knew in my heart that was the key reason why we were getting the behaviours that we did. But to have it academically and scientifically and rationally put together as a model is absolute gold dust. And as you know, the most forward-thinking and progressive schools have embraced this because it helps you to work with these children. And at the end of the day, we want these children to be successful. We don't want them to be excluded or isolated. And the more you understand about their circumstances, about the context, the better you can support them. I can only see it as of benefit to the education system, the more teachers learn and understand this. And I just, all power to those schools that are pushing. It's the understanding that can make all the difference in those relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is the first part of any training that I do, because I didn't realise, like so many people, that teachers were not trained in human development. And this was such a shock to me, that teachers were not trained in child development. You know,
I'm a history teacher, Lisa. I'm a history teacher. I know lots of history.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, as I always say, you know, who here works with children? Who here has children? Who here has ever been a child? Why on earth would it not be a fundamental part of that training? So I love the fact that we're in that place now, just as you do. But how do people access you? I mean, how do you?
So yeah, we tender to local authorities. The children, the work is put up as these students are permanently excluded, and my colleague bids and tenders for that work, so we win the work that way. That's the permanent. The other work, I've taken on that freelance entrepreneurial. I've bitten that bullet, and I get involved on Twitter, and I've got a brochure, and I respond, and I market what I'm doing. I'm at the early stages of that, but people pick up, don't they? People want ideas. People want ideas and answers, or maybe different answers to the behaviour question, and I think I've got some ideas around that. So the sad thing is, Lisa, as you well know, there is plenty of work with permanently excluded young people. And what's happened over the course of the year is that as we built a reputation, we now have schools come direct to us and talk about a piece of work. So the last 3 weeks, we're doing a really interesting piece where a local school has come to us because 2 young lads have been permanently excluded from their feeder primary schools just before the end of year 6, which in itself raises some really difficult questions about the thinking of those schools. But the secondary school, the high school, has done a really generous thing and come to us and said, will you support these 2 young men in our school and do some work with them to aid the transition? So rather than being out of school and then rocking up in September, having been out of school for 8 to 10 weeks, we're doing some work with them in the high school that they're going to, helping them to transition. But that work came direct from the school, and as we've built a reputation, that is becoming more common.
That's an awesome piece of work, though. How fantastic is that?
On behalf of the high school, it's very generous of them to do that. But yeah, it is absolutely fascinating. I mean, I said I try not to stand in judgment, but you won't be surprised to hear that both boys had special needs. One boy's statement was imminent, and yet he was still permanently excluded. So some real questions to ask about the primary schools, but we've been able to give them a far more positive experience, work with the school and families to have those conversations about why they're in this situation and how things could be better when they start in September. And that's what we try and do, isn't it? We try and give them a second chance and equip them with enough to take that second chance and to build on it.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, what's your website if anyone wants to have a look at the work you're doing?
Yeah, we are Reflective School Support, and which is the permanently excluded work, and my work specifically is equal parts education.
Brilliant. I mean, as you said, there's a lot of work to do, and I always feel like there is far more work than I can do, and everyone I know feels the same. So we have to. Yeah,
you do a lot. You do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I do too much. I'm in a constant conversation with myself and with the people around me. You know, I must do slightly less. I must, but you know what? I love it, and I'm passionate about it, and that does mean that I probably, like so many of us, do far more work than perhaps my body would like me to do. But long may it continue. But there is a big need out there, and on we go. And it's been absolutely brilliant speaking to you, Mark. And I feel, yeah, I feel like I have a kind of heart connection feeling about the two lads that you're working with, and I really want things to be okay for them.
Yeah, I think, they are, as always in these situations, they are sweet kids.
Yeah,
They made a mistake, and part of that is due to their needs. A
yeah.
lot of it is due to their needs. But I say to them, I do a piece around mistake.
Oh, I think
Terminal, but they have to forgive themselves, but they also have to learn from it, and they have to move forward, and hopefully they can. They're good lads. They should do.
that's brilliant. We did lose a tiny weeny bit of that there, Mark. So apologies to the listener about that. But it's been great to talk to you. You have a fantastic evening, and onwards we go.
Yep. You too, Lisa. Pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for having me
Thank
on.
you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.
Cheers.